Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're in Chapter 9 of Volume 1. The book is titled Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled, What is Kamma and How Does It Affect Me? In this chapter, you're going to start learning about a lot of the things, how they connect together, the things that you've already been learning, things like the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, the 3 poisons, the middle way, all of these different teachings that you've been learning over the course of the last 3.5 months or so. They're going to all start connecting together when we learn this natural law of Kamma. In reality, everything that we've been studying over the course of this group learning program, which is a 7-month program, it's all been coming back to the natural law of Kamma in one way or another, even though it might not have been addressed in that specific way. What today we're going to be doing is diving in and exploring this natural law in detail itself. But keep in mind that as we explore this, even things like the Eightfold Path and the 5 precepts and others are all coming back to this natural law of Kamma in one way or another. So welcome to all of you guys. I'm really pleased that you've decided to join for our class today. As you have questions, you're welcome to ask those by putting them into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly, and I'll help you to understand this more clearly. This natural law of Kamma, it's not something that you should believe or anything that you should just think that is some kind of mystical or magical thing at all. Instead, it's important that you learn this teaching, you reflect on it, and then you independently verify it and practice it. That's where you really start seeing all the real benefits of the natural law of Kamma. That as you learn it and you awaken to the wisdom, you'll actually be able to understand that this natural law is functioning at all times, in every single moment. That everything the Buddha taught in one way or another is coming back to this natural law of Kamma. And this is why you've been encouraged to not believe anything, but instead to learn, reflect, and practice so that you can get to wisdom. Because with belief, you don't know what's true or false. And you should never believe the natural law of Kamma, or some people call it karma. This is the Sanskrit version. But if you study the original teachings of the Buddha in the Pali language, it's represented as Kamma. Now, if this word translated to just one English word, I would actually use that English word, but unfortunately, it doesn't translate to just one English word, so I still need to use this word Kamma. This word and one other word or so are the only words that I still need to use that are the Pali language, but all other words that I use in helping to understand and helping you to practice the path to enlightenment are all in the English language. But this natural law of Kamma and this word Kamma, it doesn't translate to just one English word, but it is a natural law that's functioning at all times, just like the natural law of gravity was functioning at all times, and it affected you whether you're aware of it or not. The same thing is true with the natural law of Kamma. It's functioning at all times, whether you're aware of it or not. And the more wisdom you have of this natural law, it will actually help you to make wise decisions and then experience wholesome results in the world. Because as long as you lack wisdom of this natural law, you'll naturally make unwise decisions that lead to unwholesome results. And this is the same thing that was occurring as we were all growing up. We lacked the wisdom of the natural law of gravity, that this natural law of gravity was affecting us whether we were aware of it or not. And because we lacked wisdom, we really struggled and had difficulties with this natural law of gravity. We fell down, we hit our elbow, our knee, we busted our head maybe, we broke our toys, we knocked over glasses and broke glasses, and we had all kinds of struggles and difficulties with this natural law of gravity because we lacked wisdom. So we made unwise decisions that produced unwholesome results. But slowly but surely, we gained wisdom of this natural law, and then as we did, we made wise decisions that produced wholesome results. We learned to tie our shoes nice and tight, look at the surface of the sidewalk. We learned to climb ladders and ride bicycles. We put special things that could potentially be broken in a certain location that wouldn't get easily knocked over. And we started experiencing more wholesome results. So by the time we were 10, 12, 14, we no longer struggled with this natural law of gravity anymore. But you're still potentially struggling with this natural law of Kamma if you haven't awakened to the wisdom of this natural law, and therefore you'll have certain struggles and difficulties in life with the lack of this wisdom. So what I aim to do today is go into detail, helping you understand what the natural law of Kamma is, even though I've been exposing it to you all throughout the entire group learning program. Now we're going to go in and talk about it specifically so that you can gain the wisdom that you need to start making wiser and wiser decisions that lead to wholesome outcomes. And you can eliminate your unwise decisions that are producing unwholesome outcomes. So this natural law of Kamma, this word Kamma, what it means is cause and effect, or action and result. It's the results of your decisions. That's purely what this natural law is. And that's why it doesn't translate to just one English word, that it's all these words together. This cause and effect, or action and result. It's the results of your decisions. Real simply, you can think of the natural law of Kamma as a sequencing of events. For example, if you're polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, people will tend to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful to you. That's the results of your decisions. That's your Kamma. By you making the wise decision to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, you're experiencing certain wholesome Kamma that is coming back to you, or the wholesome results of your wise decisions. And then conversely, if you make the unwise decisions to be impolite, unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful, then people will tend to be that way with you. And that's what's going to come back to you, is the unwholesome results of your decisions, your unwholesome Kamma. So this natural law is affecting every being, whether they're aware of this natural law or not. So it's important to gain wisdom of this natural law so that then you can eliminate your unwise decisions that's producing unwholesome results, and then make more and more wise decisions that produce wholesome results. There's no being or entity that oversees this natural law. It's functioning at all times, and it just happens as a result of our intentions, our speech, and our actions. Based on the decisions that we make, we will experience certain results. And that's why in the Eightfold Path, the Buddha is sharing with you right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and other teachings so that you can get exposure to this natural law of Kamma. And then with that wisdom that you've accumulated through learning, reflecting to independently verify and practice, then you will naturally make wiser decisions that produce wholesome results. This natural law of Kamma, it's not a system of punishments and rewards. Sometimes people think of it that way. It's not about punishments and rewards. And it's not about who's at fault or who's at blame. It's not about that. You can think of it as this sequencing of events that leads to certain results. And when you understand what leads to a certain result, then you can make those wise decisions to acquire that wholesome result that you're looking for. The natural law of Kamma isn't a mystical or magical dark cloud that follows you around. Some people think that the natural law of Kamma is like a bank account that you make deposits to and you make withdrawals from. This isn't true. It's the results of your decisions. And as you gain wisdom, you'll be able to experience more and more wholesome results. So it's not something that a being is controlling. It's not punishments and rewards. It's not about who's at fault or who's at blame. This natural law is affecting everybody, whether we're aware of it or not. It's the results of our decisions. And the more wisdom we have, then the more we can make wise decisions that produce wholesome results. There's this summary that I share as it relates to the natural law of Kamma so that you can just see it very clearly, that it's your life, your decisions, and your results. Everything that you experience in life it's a result of your decisions. Now, this may not be something that you can see very clearly right now, that everything you're experiencing in life is a result of your decisions. Sometimes people think that their life is based on destiny or fate. It's almost like their life is pre-programmed and they're just kind of living out whatever is pre-programmed in their life. Well, this is a really defeating perspective to have, because if your life is pre-programmed and everything that you're going to experience is already pre-programmed as destiny or fate, then that means you have no ability to actually make decisions to improve your life. It means you're stuck. You're just like a robot going through the world, just living out whatever destiny or fate that you have. This is very unwise to have this type of perspective, and it's not actually even true. Or some people might think that you're experiencing good luck or bad luck. There's no such thing as good luck or bad luck. You're experiencing this cause and effect, or action and result. And when you lack wisdom of this natural law and you experience unwholesome results in your life, one of the very first things that the unenlightened mind will typically do is blame somebody else. It'll say it's their fault, or blame somebody around you for what you're experiencing. And as long as you keep thinking this way, that if you do have these thoughts that your life is destiny or fate, or you have good luck or bad luck, or you blame other people for what you're experiencing, then you never have the ability to improve anything about your life. So by you understanding that the natural law of Kamma is your life, your decisions, your results, and you take responsibility for that, being able to see this more and more clearly through our conversation today, then if there's anything that you don't particularly like about your life, it's just a matter of you cultivating wisdom, making different decisions to experience different results. Because if you keep doing the same things that you have been doing, you're just going to keep experiencing the same results that you have been experiencing. So getting on this path to enlightenment is to awaken to this natural law. And part of that is to be able to see that everything you're experiencing is a result of your decisions, your life, your decisions, and your results. And this is very empowering, because as I say, if there's anything about your life that you particularly don't like, it's just a matter of cultivating some wisdom, making some improved decisions, and then you will experience something different in your life. So let's look at a few of the words of the Buddha on the natural law of Kamma. These are just a few little excerpts of the Buddha's teachings on the natural law of Kamma, just to illustrate two specific points that I would like to make right here early on in the class. Now, as I mentioned, all the teachings of the Buddha in one way or another pretty much come back to the natural law of Kamma in one way or another. So everything you've been learning with the words of the Buddha, even like 2 weeks ago when we studied the 5 precepts, those teachings are the natural law of Kamma. Or when you learn the Eightfold Path, that's the natural law of Kamma. And there's even one particular book in this book series that's dedicated to the natural law of Kamma. But in reality, all the different teachings that you're studying on the path to enlightenment from the Buddha are helping you to awaken to this cause and effect, or this causality, this causal relationship between your decisions and the results that you experience. But here, let me just share with you a few little points that the Buddha is making when he teaches about the natural law of Kamma. Here he says, beings are the owners of their Kamma, the heirs of their Kamma. They have Kamma as their origin, Kamma as their relative, Kamma as their resort. Whatever Kamma they do, wholesome or unwholesome, they are its heirs. What he's saying here is you're the only one that can create Kamma for yourself. Nobody else can make decisions for you and produce Kamma for you. It's your decisions that are leading to any particular results that you experience in life. So that's why he's saying beings are the owners of their Kamma, that you are the one who's originating your Kamma. And whatever Kamma you do, either wholesome or unwholesome, you are going to experience that Kamma. Nobody else is experiencing your Kamma. It's you that's experiencing your Kamma based on your decisions. Then this next one, he says, the results of Kamma, I say, is threefold, to be experienced in this very life, or in the next rebirth, or on some subsequent occasion. That some subsequent occasion is sometime after the next rebirth, meaning multiple rebirths beyond that. Now, as I've mentioned to you, you never believe anything about the teachings of the Buddha, even the cycle of rebirth. This can be independently verified about the cycle of rebirth as you get further along in your journey on the path to enlightenment. I will share with you how you can independently verify the cycle of rebirth. But here in the group learning program, for the most part, I keep you focused on learning the core central teachings. There's a chapter that we get into, chapter 20, where I start exposing you a bit to the cycle of rebirth, but it's really later in the Pali, Canon, and English study group that I really start helping you to understand the cycle of rebirth. But here, what the Buddha is saying is any Kamma that you produce, you're going to experience it in this life, in the next life, or on some subsequent occasion. So what he's saying is you can't run and hide from your Kamma. You are going to experience your Kamma in this life, the next life, or some future life. Now, if you get to enlightenment in this life, that means you've extinguished all your unwholesome Kamma. You're only experiencing wholesome Kamma, and there is not going to be any future life to be able to experience any Kamma because you've already eliminated all your unwholesome Kamma. But as long as you have unwholesome Kamma, you're going to experience that in this life, the next life, or some subsequent occasion. The Buddha never used rebirth as a way to guilt, shame, or fear people into learning his teachings. He's just sharing with you the true reality of what's actually occurring. And here, what he's essentially saying is you can't run and hide from your Kamma. Any Kamma that you create, as he says in the first passage, is he's saying you are going to experience that. So a wise individual learning this and being able to see this, then the next question becomes, well, how do I extinguish all my unwholesome Kamma, and how do I only produce wholesome Kamma? So in order to understand this natural law so that you can make and create and produce only wholesome Kamma and extinguish all this unwholesome Kamma, you need to understand the 4 different types of Kamma that exist. There's wholesome Kamma and unwholesome Kamma. And then there's old Kamma and new Kamma. I'm going to explain these to you and give you examples so that it'll help you to be able to see this in your own life. Because remember, what I'm doing with you is I'm teaching you. I'm helping you to learn. But then you've got to do the work to reflect on this and be able to see it within your own life. And then you need to be able to then practice and be able to make wiser and wiser decisions to experience different results. So when you're reflecting, you need to be able to independently verify the teaching. So let me help you with the learning. You do the reflection on your own. And if you have any challenges with the practice, that's where you reach out and ask for guidance and help. So first, let's talk about wholesome Kamma and unwholesome Kamma. What wholesome Kamma is it's the wholesome results of your decisions. Any decisions that you make that are harmless, that's going to produce wholesome Kamma. So any decisions that you make that are harmful are going to produce unwholesome Kamma, or you're going to experience unwholesome results. Because if you're making harmful decisions that are harming you or any other beings, these are harmful decisions, so you're going to experience the unwholesome results of that coming back to you. But if you're making wise decisions that are harmless, and the Buddha is helping you to be able to see how to make harmless decisions, then you're going to experience wholesome Kamma. So like right now, you're just sitting somewhere or lying or wherever you're at, standing perhaps, listening to this, or maybe you're doing something else. You're not causing any harm just listening to my voice and learning these teachings. You are practicing a decision that is harmless, and that's why there's no harm that's coming to you. You're experiencing wholesome Kamma. You're experiencing wholesome results of your decision because you're learning teachings each week, and as you're gradually learning those teachings, you're implementing them. And this is harmless, and you're producing more and more wisdom in your mind to then be able to make wiser and wiser decisions. But connecting this to something that we learned 2 weeks ago, which is the 5 precepts, if you are making harmful decisions, say you were killing, or you were stealing, or you were having sexual misconduct, or you were lying, or taking substances that cause heedlessness, now you're making harmful decisions. You're making unwise decisions that's producing harm either to you or to other beings. And now you're going to experience the unwholesome results coming back to you. This is the unwholesome Kamma, or the unwholesome results of your decisions. So wholesome Kamma is harmless decisions. Unwholesome Kamma is going to be harmful decisions. And your Kamma is just the results of your decisions. Then you've got old Kamma and you've got new Kamma. What old Kamma is decisions that you've made in the past that you're experiencing the results of right now in the present moment. By you making decisions in the past, you're going to potentially experience some of those decisions at that time or at other times in your life. But when you make decisions in the past and you're experiencing the results right now in the present moment, this is called old Kamma. And then any decisions you're making right now in the present moment, you're producing new Kamma that's going to be experienced in the future. So let me give you some examples of this. An example of old Kamma would be, say 3 years ago, if you filled out a document for your government where you needed to report your income, and on that form you lied and you were deceptive about your income, and now you submitted that form 3 years ago. And now 3 years later, you get a notice in the mail that says you owe the government $3,000 because there was $1,000 that you lied about, and then there's $1,000 interest payment and $1,000 penalty, and now you owe them $3,000. And now this letter that you're receiving, this is the unwholesome results of your decisions, your harmful decisions. You made unwise decisions that are now going to be experienced as unwholesome old Kamma. This old Kamma is coming back to you from 3 years ago. But now in the present moment, you have some decisions to make. What do you do? Do you continue to lie and be deceitful? Therefore, you're producing new Kamma that is unwholesome. But if you understand the natural law of Kamma, that you need to extinguish this unwholesome Kamma, and you're uninterested in continuing to produce unwholesome Kamma, you need to figure out a way to extinguish this. So maybe what you do is you call up the government, you apologize, you take responsibility for the lying or the error on the form or whatever happened. And now by accepting responsibility for this error or this lie, now the government says perhaps that, okay, we're going to remove the penalty or we're going to remove the interest fee. And now you only owe us maybe $1,200. Well, now maybe you say to them, I'm so sorry, I don't have $1,200. And maybe they work out a payment plan for you that you can gradually pay this back. So now you extinguish this old unwholesome Kamma by creating new Kamma that is wholesome, because you've now admitted and you've taken responsibility for this mistake or this lie that you produced in the past. So now you've extinguished this unwholesome Kamma through paying this off slowly but surely over time. So this is wholesome Kamma and unwholesome Kamma, and then new Kamma and old Kamma. So let me pause here and see if you guys have any questions on these 4 types of Kamma before we go further into our class today, because I'm going to give you some various examples of these from my own life so that you guys can hear about these and kind of what your goal is on the path to enlightenment in terms of producing wholesome Kamma, so you'll understand how to do this. So you can ask your questions by putting those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions or follow-up questions that you like. I'm seeing a question here from Bruce in Zoom. He says, am I understanding correctly that we shouldn't use Kamma as a way to gauge whether our deeds are wholesome or unwholesome? Practicing the teachings will automatically lead to the abandoning of unwholesome Kamma. Is this correct? That last part that you shared, Bruce, I definitely suggest yes. Practicing the teachings will automatically lead to abandoning of unwholesome Kamma. This is by you practicing, what you're going to see is the Eightfold Path. That's what's going to produce only wholesome Kamma. But the other part that you're talking about, I'd like to help you with that one. You should get very attentive to the natural law of Kamma and what you're experiencing. As things are coming back to you, this is how you're learning. The natural law of Kamma is the most unbiased teacher you will ever experience, because as you're making various decisions in the world, you put a certain decision out and you see what's coming back to you, and you read that and you look at that and figure out, is it wholesome or is it unwholesome? And what were the decisions that you made that led to that? Because that's going to help you to further awaken to the natural law of Kamma. So be very attentive of what you're experiencing. And this is why you would like to really slow down the decisions that you're making. By slowing down your mind and breathing mindfulness meditation, you'll slow down the decisions that you're making in daily life, and you can put one decision out and you can see the results of that, or 2 or 3 or 4 decisions out and you can see the results of that. Whereas if you're rapid fire making a bunch of decisions in your life, you're not going to necessarily know when things are coming back to you what they're from. So you would like to really slow things down and definitely read what's coming back to you by way of helping you to understand the natural law of Kamma. And where you might be confused or needing help, that's where you can reach out to your teacher, and I will help you to be able to see the decisions that you made and what led to any particular wholesome Kamma or any particular unwholesome Kamma that you're experiencing. Great question there, Bruce. Okay, let me see what other questions we might have here. Looks like we have some questions coming in on YouTube from Max with 2 X's. Are good and bad Kamma always right around the corner? A person with bad Kamma might be prolonging the time until they experience it, and a person with good Kamma might be waiting on earnest. If my mind is calm and content in this moment, I would consider that to be good. So I describe this as wholesome Kamma and unwholesome Kamma, and every single individual being has certain Kamma. By the time you get to enlightenment, you have no more unwholesome Kamma whatsoever. You've extinguished all of it. Everything that you're experiencing is only wholesome Kamma, because now you've been making wise decisions for an extended period of time, and you've burned off all your old Kamma that is unwholesome, and all your new Kamma that you're producing is only wholesome. You're only making wiser and wiser decisions. So you're going to experience the results of your decisions, either wholesome or unwholesome. And it's going to be experienced as it's going to be experienced. You can't necessarily speed it up or slow it down. It's going to be experienced. So as unwholesome Kamma is coming back to you, you would like to be able to see that, know what it is, be able to investigate the decisions that you made that led to that unwholesome Kamma, and now you cultivate wisdom so that in the future, encountering that similar situation, you only make wise decisions that produce wholesome Kamma. So a person's with bad Kamma might be prolonging the time until they experience it. Yeah, so I've addressed that you're not necessarily going to prolong it unless you're continuing to make unwise decisions. If you continue to make lots of unwise decisions, you're just creating more and more and more unwholesome Kamma. The way that I talk about this, Max, and for all the rest of you too, this is something I usually include as part of the class, that as you've been going through life, you've been putting mud into the garden hose. This is the unwise decisions that is producing unwholesome Kamma. Because of your lack of wisdom of this natural law of Kamma, all of us put mud into a garden hose, and we've just been shoving this mud into the garden hose. And now what we're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're hooking the hose up to the faucet, and you're turning on the faucet. Well, if you come to class once every 6 months or once a year, you're meditating once a month, you've got like a little drip going through that garden hose, and you're not going to be able to clear that garden hose out in this life. But if you open that faucet more and more and get more and more clean water coming through that garden hose, maybe you're coming to classes regularly, you're reading books, you're consulting with your teacher, you're meditating, you're doing all these different activities to be able to learn and develop your life practice, and you're doing the work to be able to accomplish that. You've got all this clean water, all these wise decisions coming into this garden hose, and it's going to start pushing this mud out. So as this mud is coming out of the garden hose, you're going to need to experience that, because whatever unwise decisions you made, you can't run and hide from that. You're going to have to experience it. But if you put enough clean water into this garden hose, as it's getting rid of the mud, eventually it's going to start spitting some clean water. But then you're going to get some more mud, and then it's going to spit some clean water, and then you're going to get some more mud. But then you keep putting wise decisions into your life, you're going to be getting clean water, clean water, clean water, and then you're going to get a little bit of mud. Then you're going to get clean water, clean water, clean water, clean water, clean water, and then a little bit more mud. But eventually you put enough wise decisions into your life and you're going to see that you have nothing but clean water coming out of this garden hose, and you've completely flushed out the mud, and you're no longer putting mud into your garden hose because you're only making wise decisions. So that's what you would ultimately like to get to. And you can't necessarily speed that up. You're not interested in speeding it up, because that would be to pursue this path with craving, desire, attachment, the longing, yearning, the chasing after something. But instead, you would like to gradually learn, gradually practice, and gradually experience progress as you build up your life practice. Let's see, we have questions here on Facebook as well. How can I tell if I extinguished all my unwholesome kamma? You won't be experiencing any unwholesome results anymore. Your life will be completely peaceful, completely joyful. Your mind will be completely peaceful, completely joyful. You'll never experience even the slightest displeasure in the mind. You'll always be in a good mood. So it'll be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. You've never experienced any more anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment. Like I mentioned, you don't even have the slightest displeasure, and you're not experiencing any results coming back to you that is unwholesome. And then here is something else from Mayuli as well. I think this was actually typed in first. So if we have not extinguished our unwholesome kamma in this lifetime, we will experience rebirth. Yes, that is correct. Extinguishing your unwholesome kamma is to get to enlightenment. So if you still have unwholesome kamma at the end of this life, you will experience rebirth, because you need to experience that unwholesome kamma. You haven't cultivated the wisdom you need to extinguish that unwholesome kamma. So therefore, you're going to need to come back into the world on continuous rebirths to be able to experience it and extinguish it. What if we get to enlightenment in this lifetime and have not extinguished our kamma? You can't do that. If you get to enlightenment, you have extinguished your unwholesome kamma. So it's not possible to get to enlightenment and not extinguish your unwholesome kamma. That's part of the path of what you're actually doing, is extinguishing your unwholesome kamma in order to be able to get to enlightenment. Because one of the unwholesome kammas that you're experiencing, one of the results of your unwholesome kamma, is that you haven't trained your mind. You still have those pollutions that we talked about in our last class about the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots. So you need to extinguish the craving, anger, and ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality. And by extinguishing that through training of the mind, then you'll be capable of making only wise decisions that are going to produce wholesome results. As long as you have craving, anger, and ignorance in your mind, as you're going to see in a moment, you're going to produce unwholesome kamma, because that's where the unwholesome kamma is coming from. So what you're working to do is extinguish your craving, anger, and ignorance, which now, by eliminating that from the mind, you'll be capable of making wise decisions through generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, which will now move you closer and closer to enlightenment as you're making wiser and wiser decisions. All right, great questions, everyone. Let's see, we have something else from Max here. I see that question came from being surrounded by large houses, mansions, very wealthy people during my workday. Usually I don't have jealousy here, but of course a little craving here and there. Yeah, so, wealthy people are experiencing their kamma as well, right? Like, you can't run and hide from your kamma. If someone is wealthy, this is their kamma. Whereas if somebody's lacking resources, this is their kamma also. So by cultivating wisdom, we can then produce more wealth if that's what we would like to do, if that's potentially what you would like to do. But remember, wealth isn't going to lead to a happy life. That's not what's going to produce the happiness. But you do need to have your basic necessities taken care of. So people can start out in life with lacking resources, and then through cultivating wisdom, they can improve their life and acquire more resources. But then you can also start out life with more resources, and then through your lack of wisdom, make unwise decisions, and then you decline over time. So these things are all possible, and this is the results of your decisions as these things are happening. All right, so let me move on to the next part, because now that you're understanding a bit about what wholesome and unwholesome kamma is in terms of harmless and harmful, and then old and new, let's talk about how you generate wholesome kamma and unwholesome kamma. These are the words of the Buddha. The way that you generate unwholesome kamma is through craving, anger, and ignorance. When you're making decisions through craving, anger, and ignorance, it's going to produce unwholesome kamma. If you were part of last week's class, or you listened to the replay, or you read the book about chapter 8, I helped students to understand and learn what craving, anger, and ignorance is. If you weren't here in that class, I'll just give you a little bit of a recap, but it's important that you go learn that in detail. What craving is where the mind is longing and yearning and chasing after the objects of its affection, thinking that this thing is going to provide some kind of lasting satisfaction. It's like the next new shiny object waiting around the corner is going to provide some kind of fulfillment or satisfaction, so the mind chases after it. And oftentimes one becomes very selfish when there's a certain amount of craving in the mind. So whenever you make decisions out of your own selfishness and your own selfish desires, it's going to produce unwholesome karma, because it's unwise to make decisions based on craving. And then as you're chasing your cravings, you'll sometimes get what you want, and you'll get those conditioned pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. Those feelings will arise, they will change, and then they will fade away. And as they fade away, then your mind might end up in this anger. Or if you're chasing after the objects of your affection and you don't get what you want, then your mind can end up in this anger too. Where now, when you feel those painful feelings of sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, now the mind doesn't like those uncomfortable, painful feelings, and you'll either push people away, this is called aversion, thinking that that's going to solve the problem, or you become bitter and harsh and hostile towards people, and that pushes people away as well. People choose to leave out of your life. Or you might put your expectations on people, trying to control them to do things your way, because you feel like if you can just get your cravings fulfilled, that then everything will be perfect. But none of these solutions work, because as long as you push people away with aversion, you notice that when you push them away, you still get angry, you still get irritated, you still get annoyed about something else, because that's not the true problem. If the true problem was your family members or your friends or your coworkers, then when you push them away, your life would be completely peaceful and joyful. You'd never experience anger ever again. But that's not the case. That when you push people away, you still get annoyed, you still get agitated and irritated, because that's not the true problem. And if being bitter and harsh and hostile with people fixed the problem, then again, you wouldn't have to keep getting bitter and harsh and hostile with people. You'd be able to do that one time, it would solve the problem, and it would be over with. But that doesn't solve your problem, because as soon as you put out bitterness and hostility, that's what comes back to you. And when you try to put your expectations on people, they choose to leave out of your life because they feel pressured. They don't want to follow what you're pressuring them to do. And you can't control 8 billion people in the world to do things your way. You'd have to have a massive training program to teach all 8 billion people in the world to do things your way. And this is not possible. So as long as you keep misunderstanding the problem, that thinking the problem is external and outside of you, you'll keep pushing people away, being bitter and harsh and hostile, or putting your expectations on people. And this is all coming from that anger, that hostility, that unknowing of true reality, which is the next one, which is the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, that the mind doesn't understand that its craving is what's really causing your discontent feelings. And this anger arising is being caused by the mind itself. Because of this unknowing of true reality, or this confusion or delusion or misunderstanding or misperceptions of true reality, the mind lacks the ability to see and understand that its own craving and anger is causing it so much complications. And that's because the mind will typically, in the unenlightened state, blame other people for what you're experiencing, because it just lacks wisdom of what's truly happening. So as long as you're making decisions through these selfish desires, through this anger and bitterness and hostility, through this unknowing of true reality or confusion, it will produce unwholesome results in your life. So you need to gradually bring those down and extinguish them, so that you're no longer making unwise decisions that are producing unwholesome karma. And as you do, what you're bringing up in your life is you're bringing up the generosity, the loving kindness, and the wisdom. These are the exact opposites of craving, anger, and ignorance. Because if the craving is the selfish desires where you're holding on to things, wanting them to be self-pleasing because of your selfishness, then the generosity where you're sharing and you're giving more than is required in any given situation of your time, effort, energy, and resources without any expectation of anything in return, that's the exact opposite of craving, which is to practice generosity, training the mind to let go. And then this anger or this bitterness or hostility, this ill will, the exact opposite of that is loving kindness. That's the genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. That's the active goodwill. And you're using loving kindness meditation and practicing loving kindness in your daily life through your intention, speech, and actions to help you be able to be more loving and kind and transform your mind gradually over time. And where all this is coming from is your cultivation of wisdom, that you're learning, you're reflecting to independently verify, and you're practicing the teachings. So as you're cultivating this wisdom, you're not believing the teachings of the Buddha. Now you get the wisdom of how to actually train the mind to now bring down craving, anger, and ignorance and bring up your generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, because it's the generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom that is going to produce this wholesome Kamma, because now you're making wise decisions based on the natural law of Kamma. So what you do in order to extinguish all your unwholesome Kamma is you deeply learn and practice the Eightfold Path. This is why at the very beginning of this group learning program, I taught it in 3 individual classes where I broke it down into the wisdom, moral conduct, and mental discipline section. And then I taught it again in chapter 4 and chapter 5 so that you could learn it and start to really hone in on what the Eightfold Path is. And of course, you're going to need to revisit that multiple times over the course of your journey with the path to enlightenment. But you'll need to learn, reflect, to independently verify, and practice these teachings to be able to train the mind to produce only wholesome Kamma. Because when you're making decisions through the Eightfold Path, you're only producing wholesome Kamma, because these are wise decisions based in the natural law of Kamma that the Buddha is sharing with you. So this Eightfold Path, it's like 8 individual dials for your life in your life practice that you're dialing in closer and closer to improve the condition of your mind and the condition of your life. Much like if you had a set of speakers that had 8 dials and you needed to dial these in to get a better and better quality sound out of the speakers, the same thing is true when it comes to the Eightfold Path, that you're going to need to revisit that and see the teachings of the Buddha using the words of the Buddha to be able to dial this in closer and closer in your life so that the condition of your mind and the condition of your life gradually improves. So it's through producing only wholesome Kamma through the Eightfold Path that you then extinguish all your unwholesome Kamma. So that example I gave you with filling out the tax form, if you didn't know the natural law of Kamma and you got that notice in the mail, you might continue to lie and be deceitful because you don't understand the natural law of Kamma. But if you've studied these teachings and you understand what's truly going on, now you realize the most unwise thing you could do is continue to be deceitful, continue to lie. That would be so very unwise. So you would need to extinguish that through making wise decisions of practicing the right speech, which is from the Eightfold Path, which the 4th precept plugs into that, where you're abandoning false speech, becoming a truth speaker, one to be relied on, not a deceiver of the world. So now by you making wiser and wiser decisions, having learned the natural law of Kamma through all the different teachings that you're going to need to explore, then you can extinguish all this unwholesome Kamma that's coming back to you as time goes on. And the way that you clean this up is through cleaning up the decisions that you're making, only making wise decisions, but realizing even though you might be studying right now and starting to understand this a bit, you can't just snap your fingers and then start instantly practicing only wise decision making. So that dirt that you're shoving into the garden hose, the mud that you're shoving into the garden hose, we've been doing that all throughout our life. And if you're still unenlightened, you're still putting mud into the garden hose, but you're trying to get more and more and more clean water through that garden hose and less and less mud into the garden hose. So if you have craving, anger, and ignorance in your mind, you're still putting a certain amount of mud into that garden hose, but you're bringing that down more and more and more as you're training in meditation and all the other tools and techniques that the Buddha is teaching you, and you're bringing up your generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. And over time, your generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom will exceed the craving, anger, and ignorance. And eventually, your craving, anger, and ignorance will be fully extinguished, and you'll only be practicing generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. But even at that point, you still have unwholesome kamma that you're going to need to extinguish. So even if you could snap your fingers today and practice the teachings of the Buddha perfectly, you still have unwholesome kamma to deal with. You're not going to be able to snap your fingers and practice the teachings of the Buddha perfectly today. So even if you were able to do that, though, you would still need to experience the unwholesome results coming back to you. So let me give you an example from my own personal life, help you to understand what it means to transform your mind and then have to still extinguish your unwholesome kamma. In the past, when I was growing up, I lived a very harsh life. My family life was very hectic, very aggressive, very hostile. I grew up this way. I grew up with my relatives, yelling and hollering and arguing, doing very aggressive things like that. So when I grew up, my mind conformed to this as a child, because you basically look at the adults around you, you look at how they're functioning, and you grow up thinking that that's the way you should function too. The unenlightened mind, we are conformists. We conform to what's going on around us. As we don't know these teachings, we don't have the wisdom, we just conform to what's going on around us. So at certain points in my life, I was somewhat hostile and aggressive and bitter. Of course, there were certain situations where I was polite and kind and friendly and respectful, but there were certain relationships that I really struggled in. And one of those relationships was with my wife, who now we're together for 16 years. But all the way up until about the 11th year mark, I was still bitter and hostile and not practicing these teachings because I didn't know how to practice these teachings fully. So I was still struggling and having difficulties in the world. I was still putting mud into the garden hose. So I was still bitter and harsh with her at different times. And then because of that, she was also bitter and harsh with me right back. It was just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then over time, I noticed that my son was also being bitter and harsh with his mom because his mind was conforming to me. He was observing what I was doing, and he thought, okay, this is the way I should treat my mom because that's the way my dad treats her. So this must be a normal way to treat a woman and treat my mom. So observing this and realizing that this all needed to change, I had to do the work first within my own mind. So I started doing the work very closely in order to transform my own mind. And once I was only loving and kind. I was only calm and polite and respectful and friendly to my wife. But even though I started doing that, she was still bitter and harsh and hostile because that's the decisions that I made in the past. So this was coming back to me. In her other relationships with other people, she could be friendly and polite and respectful because that's the way their relationships were. But in our relationship, because of the way that I had treated her, this unwholesome kamma was coming back to me. So even though I had transformed my mind, for about a year and a half, I needed to experience this unwholesome kamma coming back to me. But now I did something different. Where in the past, if my wife would have picked up the rubber ball of anger and threw that rubber ball around, I would have picked it up too, and I would have thrown it around. And then she would have picked it up and threw it around. And then I would have picked it up and threw it around. And we had all these rubber balls of anger, bouncing around the room, and our heads were spinning. But now I started doing something different. When she would pick up the ball of anger and throw it around the room, I would just watch it roll to the corner and lose its energy. And now I just remain calm. And in some situations, I would just sit there and remain calm. And I would ask her, is there anything else? Is there anything else you would like to say? Come on, get it all out. I would like you to share everything. Because I could remain calm, and she was able to just get it all out. And eventually it got extinguished. Or in other situations, I would just walk away. If I felt like she was being too aggressive, too hostile, and I was concerned about whether I would say or do something specific, I would just walk away and let her sit there and be angry. So I made sure that I was never being angry and bitter and harsh to her because I knew that whatever I put out, it was going to come back to me. So I either just sat there and smiled and wide to her, showing her respect, or I asked her, is there anything else? Yes, dear. Is there anything else you would like to say? please say it all, go ahead, get it all out. Or in some cases, I would just walk away, right? But I never was angry or hostile or bitter back to her from that time frame where I had transformed my mind. So this, over time, this year and a half, it ultimately extinguished. So that now, for the last 4, 5, 6 years, it's only been love and kindness and respect in both directions. That we don't argue, we don't have bitterness, we don't have hostility. There's none of that. We don't even have an elevated voice in our house. Instead, if we have anything that we're talking about, we just sit down and discuss it. And of course, there's certain things that she would like to do that's opposite of what I would like to do. We have a disagreement, but we sit down and talk about that disagreement and discuss, what are we going to do in this situation? Where before we would have such craving that we weren't getting what we wanted, so our anger would arise. And this was all coming from our ignorance. So once we extinguished all of this, then we are able to be loving and kind and respectful to each other, understanding the natural laws, and particularly the universal truth of impermanence, that it's not possible for me to agree with every decision that she makes. And it's not possible for her to agree with every decision that I make. But I can still love her as a person while disagreeing with the decisions that she makes, and realizing that part of loving her as a person is ensuring that she has the space she needs to make her own decisions, that I don't try to force my decisions on her, but instead that by loving somebody, you create space to allow them to make all their own decisions, and then they experience the results of their decisions. I can give her advice, I can give her support, I can give her guidance if she's open to it, but ultimately it's her decisions to make whatever decision she would like in her life. And I'm not going to agree with 100% of those decisions. Where in the past, when I didn't agree with her decisions, it was like a fight to death, that I had to be right or she had to be right. Where now we understand that we're going to disagree sometimes, and that's okay. And we just talk about those disagreements, and sometimes we get up and one of us have agreed with the other and we're both now in agreement. Or other times we get up from the conversation and we still disagree with each other, and she does what she's going to do and I do what I'm going to do, but we're both comfortable with that. And we both understand that that's impermanence, that's normal. And then I also had to teach my son how to now talk with his mom and be respectful and polite and kind and friendly with his mom, because that was part of my unwholesome karma that I needed to clean up as well. So now our household is completely calm, completely friendly and warm. We don't have any issues like we did in the past, because all of us are practicing the teachings, and we don't have this craving, anger, and ignorance circulating around in the mind that's now going to produce all kinds of unwise decisions and unwholesome results. Instead, we're practicing generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. So this is what you're going to need to do in your life as well if you're looking to extinguish your unwholesome karma. There are certain relationships in your life that you have right now that you have bitterness and hostility in those relationships. And either you're so bitter and strong and hostile, or they are, and you're not committed to this relationship, and you're going to need to move on from the relationship. That's how you're going to need to clean up the karma in that particular situation. You're just going to need to move on because you're not committed to the relationship. There's too much work involved, and maybe the other person isn't willing to do the work, and they're not committed to the relationship either. So there's some relationships that you're going to need to just move on from. Then there's other relationships that you're currently in now that are somewhat problematic, or there's some bitterness or resentment in those relationships, but you're committed to the relationship and the other person's committed to the relationship. Kind of like me and my wife. We were committed to this relationship and we worked it out. And that's what you're going to need to do in some of your relationships. And then there's a third category of relationships where they're completely new people that you haven't even met yet. And now that you're learning and practicing these teachings, eventually you're going to meet new people in your life, and you're only ever going to be practicing generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom in those relationships. And therefore, those relationships are going to only be experiencing wholesome karma, that you're going to experience wholesome karma as a result of the decisions in those relationships. You may even have some of those relationships right now in your life where you've never said a harsh word to that person, and those people have never said a harsh word to you either, that you're only experiencing wholesome karma in those relationships. So these are the three categories of relationships that you're you're going to encounter in your journey to enlightenment, and the way that you're going to need to clean up your unwholesome karma from the past, is you're going to have relationships that you're in now that you're just going to choose to move on from. You don't need to go to that person and give them a whole laundry list of why it is that you're moving on, because all you're doing is telling them all your cravings and all your expectations that that person's not meeting, and therefore you're getting angry at them and you need to move on. Sometimes it's just better to just move on without even talking to the person, depending on the relationship, right? If it's a marriage or a significant relationship, you're going to need to talk and sort this out. But if it's just a friendship or something like that, you might be able to just move on. So you're going to have some relationships where you just move on. You have other relationships that you're committed to that you're going to need to work out and start practicing the Eightfold Path more and more closely in those relationships, and they will clear out over a period of time. It's not going to be 1 week or 1 month. As you heard with me and my wife practicing closely, it was 1.5 years. So it's going to take you some time. You're going to need to be committed to this relationship and be dedicated and diligent to improving it. Then there's this third category of brand new people you've never even met yet, and now you're only going to be generous, loving and kind, and practicing wisdom, and those relationships will just always be on firm footing, very stable, very loving, very warm relationships, and you won't experience any difficulties in those relationships because you're now practicing the generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. So let me see if you guys have any questions here. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. Okay, we have a question here coming in from Mayu Lee. She says, to create wholesome karma, we should make our decisions through generosity, intentions, and actions. Is that correct, sir? What if we have wholesome intentions and wholesome actions, but the end result perceived by the other parties were negative? Okay, so right now, you may think that your intentions, your speech, and your actions are wholesome because the mind is not understanding what it doesn't understand. If you're not practicing right intention or right speech or right action, which is from the Eightfold Path, then you've got some wrong intentions, wrong speech, and wrong actions that you just might not be able to see. So if you're putting out certain intention, speech, and actions, and what you're getting back is unwholesome, then there's something that you're doing in your decision making that you haven't fully awoke to right intention, right speech, and right action. You might understand it intellectually, but you might not be practicing it 100%. But even in practicing it 100%, there can be some rare situations where people are bitter and harsh and hostile with you, even though you're practicing right intention, right speech, and right action. It can happen. But in those situations, you will know that you've practiced right intention, right speech, and right actions with 100% certainty, because 99.9% of all your relationships are completely peaceful, completely joyful. You don't have any issues whatsoever. And on this rare occasion, there's a brand new person that you meet that they have so much craving, anger, and ignorance in their mind that even when you're practicing the Eightfold Path, they just aren't responding in a positive way. By that point, your mind will be fully protected, that when they're angry and bitter and harsh with you, you won't experience painful feelings. So you can get to a point where this is occurring. But if you're at this point in time, based on what I know about your practice, Mayu Lee, if you're experiencing any kind of unwholesome results coming back to you, once again, I would like to invite you to schedule an appointment with me. Even though I know that last one we weren't able to do, I suggest you schedule an appointment so we can talk about the topic that we had planned previously, and then now this new topic. Because if there's any unwholesome results that you're experiencing from somebody, I would ask you a bunch of questions about what you were doing in those situations to try to verify what is it that you were practicing that would potentially lead to these unwholesome results. And we might get into those questions and find out that you were practicing right intention, right speech, and right action. But you would like to confirm that to be 100% sure, because that's where you can use the Natural Law of Kamma as the most unbiased teacher. But you need to talk to an actual live teacher to receive guidance and verify and confirm as you're experiencing various situations. This is one of the ways that you can get help. All right, let me see here. We have a question coming in on Zoom from EY. Is complaining or telling people your issues more than that they can take until they start to avoid you considered generating unwholesome karma that they avoid you? Yes. If you're complaining and if you're talking in unwise ways and kind of dumping on somebody, this might be considered frivolous speech or idle chatter. What frivolous speech or idle chatter is, which is what the Buddha teaches us not to do, is talking based in craving, that the mind is just yada, 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 yada. So if somebody's just constantly complaining and this person just starts to tune you out, that's your unwholesome karma as a result of practicing wrong speech, that you had frivolous speech or idle chatter where you had a craving to talk and your speech was unbeneficial. If you remember the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, that you speak at the right time, what you say is true, you speak gentle, you speak beneficially, and you speak with a mind of loving kindness. So you need to look at any kind of complaining, because this could be frivolous speech and it can be unbeneficial speech. Because what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to talk with somebody and be sure that they're receptive and open to what it is that you're sharing. All right, so let me see if there's any other questions here. You're welcome, EY. Pleased to help you. Okay. All right, we have a question coming in from Bruce here. It says, there is no way to cleanse the karma that you have produced in the past that you have not yet to experience, correct? Yes. The karma has to come back to you to experience the unwholesome karma. You're going to experience that unwholesome karma. You can't run or hide from it. But when it comes back to you, now you've got to extinguish it. So like in the example I gave, where my wife was bitter and harsh and hostile with me, I knew that I needed to extinguish this. And the only way for me to extinguish it is I had to experience it. So that's why in some situations when she was bitter and harsh and hostile, I would say, is there anything else, honey? Do you have anything else in there you'd like to say? Go ahead, say it all, get it all out. Because I knew she had to get it all out. I needed to experience it all. So you're going to need to experience it all. And then you have to do something with it. And in this situation, I just buried it. It's like burying it in the sand. I didn't become bitter and harsh and hostile back, where that's what I would have done in the past, and it would have just kept this unwholesome karma continuing to go forward. So you need to experience it, and then you can extinguish it. Just like the letter from the government that I talked about. That letter has to come back for you to then be able to experience it. But there are some situations, like maybe you know that you've made some unwise decisions in the past, and now you can proactively extinguish it. I'll give you an example on this one. When I was about 23, 24, I had a 4x4 Jeep, and it was a brand new Jeep, and I parked it at this apartment building, and I went in to visit a friend. And there was a tow truck circulating in the parking lot, and it swooped up my Jeep, and it took it to a lot. And I didn't even know about this. And the truck actually sat right there and watched me park. Instead of warning me, they just let me park there. And then it was like $300 and some to get it out. Well, when I found out about this, I was so attached to my car. I had so much ego. I jumped over the fence of the towing lot, and I put it in 4-wheel drive, and I plowed out of the fence really late at night and destroyed their whole fence. And then, of course, there was certain ramifications, but I was able to escape it to a certain degree, but not fully, because I avoided the criminal charges. There was a civil case where I was found guilty, and there was like a $2,000 penalty. But my lawyer said, all you need to do is forget about this and don't worry about this, that you'll never even have to pay it. It'll just sit in my drawer. But as I aged, I got to a point of somewhere in my 30s, I think it was, and I called up this towing company. I apologized for what I did, and I offered to make payment to fix their fence, even though they had already fixed it because it was like 10 years later. But I was taking responsibility for this, and I knew that this thing was out there and I hadn't extinguished it. So I called them up and went through the lawyers, and I extinguished it. So this is where you can be proactive. If you know there are certain things that are out there like that, you can extinguish it and take the action to extinguish it. Okay, you're welcome, Bruce. Pleased to help you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let me just share one other thing about the Natural Law of Kamma as I finish up the class for you guys and help you fully understand this Natural Law of Kamma. This relates to the laws of society, because we have certain human laws which are functioning at a certain level. And then we have the natural law of Kamma, which is a much higher law. It's functioning at a much higher level. The human laws that we create, which are the laws of society, these are imperfect. They can't be created, implemented, and enforced fairly for all beings. They can't be produced and enforced equally because human beings are involved and we are prone to errors. So why we always should aspire to create, implement, and enforce more and more wise laws and do that more equitably and more fairly, knowing human beings and knowing how we function, it's impossible for us to permanently get it right and actually implement laws that are 100% fair and 100% enforced equally amongst all beings. So if you see a certain person go to court and found guilty or not guilty, you might think that, they escaped their Kamma, or they're running and hiding from their Kamma. Maybe this person has a bloody footprint at the murder scene, or maybe they have a bloody knife in their house or blood in their car, but they go to court and they're found not guilty. Well, they haven't escaped their Kamma. They aren't going to jail, which is just one part of their Kamma, but it's not their entire Kamma. There's other things that they're going to be experiencing. There's other consequences. There's results of their decisions that they're going to be experiencing above and beyond going to prison or jail, for example. There's things like having a bad reputation, because if these things were found and the public knows about this, and then you're found not guilty, you're going to have a bad reputation. You could experience sickness or disease. You can experience physical and mental pain. You can experience a shorter lifespan. There's a certain amount of hostility and aggression in a person's mind to be able to kill a human being or to kill an animal. So if somebody's out there killing and they go to court and they're found not guilty, they're not just going to poof and eliminate that hostility and anger. They have hostility and anger in all their different relationships, and they're going to continue to have that hostility and aggression in their various relationships. So they're going to be involved in hostility and aggression and fights, and they may even be killed at a later date due to their hostility and aggression. They can experience a loss of income or wealth, because now someone might be hesitant to give them a job, and they're going to need to spend an exorbitant amount of money to be able to defend themselves in court. So they're going to lose their income and a certain amount of wealth. They're going to have difficulties in relationships. They're going to have difficulties securing and progressing in employment, difficulties in securing housing, and difficulties in acquiring the basic necessities to sustain life. This is all the results of their decisions that they chose to kill, and now they're experiencing these results. They can also be experiencing discontentedness, things like fear or guilt or shame or other things like this. And then, of course, rebirth itself. This is Kamma as well. So if an individual is reborn continuously over and over and over again, and particularly even in the lower realms of hell, animal, and afflicted spirits, then these beings are experiencing the results of their decisions. They're going to need to extinguish their unwholesome Kamma. So you can't run and hide. So the courts are functioning, and that's part of one's Kamma, but it's not 100% of their Kamma. There's other things that you may not be seeing that this individual is experiencing. So if you're learning and practicing the natural law of Kamma, it's a much higher law than anything that any government has ever created. So if you're practicing the natural law of Kamma, you'll never need to worry about the laws of society, because you're going to be practicing a moral conduct that is much higher than anything that is really written down in any particular government of any society. So you don't have to worry or have anxiety or fear about the laws of society when you're practicing the natural law of Kamma. And understand that an individual who's found guilty or not guilty, they're experiencing the results of their decisions regardless. So let me see what questions you guys have about this or anything else we've been talking about. I see, Francis, you have your hand up. If you'd like to ask your question, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I have a question to ask. This is related to karma as well as the precepts on avoid taking lives or living beings. Now, this question came to me because there was someone was contemplating. I call it like assisted suicide, the terminology they use, where this person is in coma, and on life support for a long time, and it had been draining the resources of the family. And doctors advised that consider some options. One of them was to remove the life support, and let this person go away peacefully rather than everybody suffering. So I look at it as it is taking away life of somebody. And in the context of karma, what is your input on this one? That if someone were to go ahead and perform this assisted suicide, what is going to be the repercussion in terms of the unwholesomeness results that may come back to the person?
Okay, there's two things to talk about here. The first one is what you're describing with someone who's on life support and then they're choosing to end the life support and this person then dies. This isn't suicide. This isn't assisted suicide. This isn't the intentional taking of one's life. That being has actually already died, and now their life is being prolonged with medical technology. And the fact that there isn't enough resources to be able to pay for this life support to continue, and that life support is being unplugged, then this is the Kamma. This is the results of the decisions that there's just not enough resources. But that being hasn't been killed. They've already died, and then the life support is just there to keep them alive, and it's artificially keeping them alive. So the family who's choosing to eliminate the life support, their mind can be at ease that they haven't killed this person. They don't need to experience guilt or shame or fear or anything like that, because they're making the decision to allow this person's life to go forward, that the body can no longer sustain life. They're not the one who's doing the killing. Either the person has been injured in some kind of accident or something that now their body can no longer sustain life. So that's the first part of that. But the second part is, if somebody does have assisted suicide where somebody decides, I would like to die and I want you to help me to accomplish that, and now this person chooses to do that, now that person is participating in an assisted suicide. And in terms of the exact Kamma that they're going to experience, the Buddha says that it would be unwise to try to figure this out, that it would lead to only frustration or madness. We know generally that this person's going to experience discontentedness. There's most likely going to be a certain amount of guilt or shame or fear that's in the mind. If you repeatedly kill over and over and over again, you can experience a shorter lifespan. Of course, if they're doing assisted suicide in an environment where it's illegal, they can go to jail, they can experience a bad reputation, all those things in terms of murder, those same things like loss of income, different things like this, difficulties in relationships and things of this nature. So the Buddha guides us to not try to figure out the exact Kamma. And he says it would lead to either frustration or madness because everybody experiences Kamma differently. If you remember back to that simile that he has about the lump of salt, that you have a bowl of water and this water represents your wholesome Kamma, and then you take a lump of salt and you put that into the bowl of water, and now this water is undrinkable. But if you have an entire river and you take that same size of lump of salt and you put it in the river, now that water is still drinkable. So the unwholesome Kamma that's produced is the lump of salt. It's the same unwholesome Kamma, but it depends on the amount of wholesome Kamma you've already created in terms of how you're going to experience that unwholesome Kamma. Is it to the point where it's very significant and it makes the water undrinkable? Or have you produced so much wholesome Kamma that this unwholesome Kamma is insignificant compared to all the other wholesome Kamma that you've created? So this is why you can't literally see the exact results of a certain particular decision, and it would lead to frustration or madness because there's so many variables involved that you can't delineate to that level of detail. But those things that I just talked about in terms of an intentional killing that could be experienced, those are potential options that could be experienced.
Okay. I got your way of thought. So in the day, actually, it's like you always say to me that do not focus on the end results. That's like chasing and craving for things. Like for me now, I just focus a lot on generosity. I just do it and not thinking about what goodness will it come to me. I just go ahead and just practice generosity as much as I can. So is that a way to think?
Yes, you just practice generosity, the loving kindness and the wisdom, knowing and having confidence that this is the natural law of Kamma and seeing the truth for yourself as you experience the natural law of Kamma, but don't have any expectation that you will receive wholesome benefits back. But as you're experiencing wholesome results, this is actually helpful for you because you can see the truth for yourself. That when you have craving, anger, and ignorance, wow, it produces all these unwholesome results. But when you practice generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, look at all these wholesome results that you experience.
Yeah, because of late, that in the last month or two, I feel so at peace with myself. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of generosity work. But before that, I didn't do much of that, So I was feeling very hostile, very aggressive, especially my mom. So yeah, all these things is working well, but I just focus back on what I need to do and not on the chasing of what result will I get, the expectation and all that. Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, you're welcome, Francis. Sounds like your practice is coming together more and more.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So what I'll do is just thank all of you guys for joining for today's class and remind you that it's wise to read this chapter, just like all the other chapters that I teach you guys. It's important to read those because then you're going to be seeing what's written in the book and you're going to see what I'm sharing in the classes. And there's certain things in the classes that I share that aren't in the books. And there's certain things in the book that aren't in the actual classes as well. So the combination of the two of these, reading and coming to class, you're going to get the full benefit of exploring any particular topic. And that's why you have a whole week to be able to do that so that you can gradually learn it. And some of these chapters you can read in 15 or 20 minutes. Others you would like to break up and read 15 or 20 minutes per day, and over the course of 3 or 4 days you will have read the entire chapter. Rather than sitting down and necessarily reading for a full hour, it's better to break it up into smaller digestible chunks. So next week on Sunday, I'm going to be sharing with you chapter 10, which is titled What is Merit? This is a unique type of Kamma that you're going to need to produce. It's wholesome Kamma that you'll need to produce in order to make your way to enlightenment. So I'll explain to you what that is and help you to learn it and practice it as well. And on Wednesday, I'm going to be doing our guided meditation where I'm going to be helping you to learn and practice the loving kindness meditation, which is going to ultimately help you extinguish that anger, hatred, and ill will. So you're welcome to come to class or listen to the recordings in order to practice loving kindness meditation. And then, of course, we have the Pali, Canon, and English study group each Saturday that you're more than welcome to attend at any point. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you all for your dedication and diligence to learning and practicing these teachings. We'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee Khap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.